The National Desk, America's News Now.
Developing now, the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, the death toll rising, Florida's Gulf Coast in ruins.
There's nothing left. It's heartbreaking for all those families, for all those businesses.
A clearer picture now emerging as recovery efforts push on. Our fact-check team digging into how the U.S. government is helping rebuild. Plus, America on a borrowing binge, reaching record highs. The national debt surpassing $31 trillion for the first time ever.
That is a huge amount of money.
The nation's fiscal woes are getting worse as the Fed continues to raise interest rates.
We have got to get inflation behind us. I wish there were a painless way to do that.
Why the world's top CEOs are warning we are on the brink of a global recession. And midterm mayhem, a bombshell report alleging a Republican Senate candidate who favors a ban on abortions once paid for one.
I never asked anyone to get an abortion. I never paid for an abortion.
His son now firing back.
Don't lie on the lives you've destroyed and act like you're some moral family man.
How Republicans are responding and the impact it could have on the all-important Georgia race. And this is the National Desk, America's News Now, the weekend edition. I'm Angela Brown. We begin with the biggest headlines of the week and a look ahead at what you can expect. Let's start with the top 4 stories of the week. The economy is center stage. The world's top CEOs are preparing for a global recession, while the biggest oil producers in the world say it's time to cut back on oil production. This as gas prices go up. Also, President Biden and Governor Ron DeSantis joining forces in Florida, surveying the damage left behind from Hurricane Ian as another problem emerges. We're talking about looters. But our top story is all about your money and the number everyone is talking about this week. The national debt now stands at over $31 trillion. You're looking at it right here. It's no secret we've carried large-scale debt for a long time. But the pandemic pushed that number higher and faster. Outstanding debt climbing nearly $8 trillion since the beginning of 2020. The Fed raising interest rates to fight inflation. But some of the world's top business leaders fear it's too late to stop a recession. The National Desk Ultra Elinashar explains what that could mean for jobs and prices.
Business leaders around the world preparing for tough times ahead, but most say they can handle it. 86% of CEOs believe there will be a recession in the next year, according to a new KPMG survey. 76% have plans in place to deal with it.
The vast majority of CEOs reported they're very confident about their growth prospects over the next 3 years, as well as the resiliency of their companies and the U.S. economy.
How resilient they'll need to be isn't clear yet. 58% of CEOs think a recession will be mild and short. The risk comes as central banks around the world, including the U.S. Federal Reserve, aggressively tighten their monetary policy, in part by raising interest rates, to fight inflation, mixed with the uncertainty of geopolitics. Also predicting a recession is the United Nations. Its Conference on Trade Development calling the tighter monetary policy an imprudent gamble that will destabilize developing countries. Here in the U.S., the Federal Reserve making clear they're not shying away from their mandate to stabilize prices and may keep interest rates high well into next year. But a sign of progress came Tuesday with news that the labor shortage, a key driver of inflation, is improving. Job openings dropped by more than 1 million between July and August, but economist Layla O'Kane says the labor market is still tight enough that mass layoffs, a telltale sign of recession, aren't on the horizon yet.
Employers are still thinking about headcount in terms of who they're not able to hire rather than who they need to lay off. So they're going back to those openings that they've maybe had up for a really long time at this point and saying, look, I'm not going to hire those people. I'm going to give up on that. All of this part of how businesses are navigating shifting economic conditions and protecting themselves from a possible recession. In Washington, I'm Ultra Elinashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
More bad news this week for families already hit hard by inflation. Gas prices are going back up. So far, the increase has been small, but that could change. And here is one major reason why. OPEC is planning to slash oil production by 2 million barrels per day starting in November, the biggest cut since the start of the pandemic, which could push prices up. Even set off an oil war, the president saying this.
It is a disappointment, and it says that they're a problem.
A rise in prices as drivers are finally catching a break. The average American household saved $120 a month when gas dropped to roughly $3.67 from over $5 a gallon. Also making headlines, the Justice Department now demanding the former President Donald Trump return any outstanding documents marked classified. The New York Times reporting the DOJ does not believe the former president has returned all of the sensitive documents, pointing to dozens of envelopes seized at Mar-a-Lago marked top secret but empty inside. This comes after a federal appeals court sided with the DOJ and has agreed to speed up its ruling on whether a special master should have been appointed to review thousands of documents seized at Mar-a-Lago back in August. This all on the heels of 14 former Trump White House aides telling the Washington Post classified records were regularly mishandled. The anonymous officials say Trump never strictly followed protocol for handling sensitive documents and often mixed secret and not secret files. A spokesperson for the former president says the DOJ leaked the information to hurt his image. Turning now to the other big story dominating the headlines this week, Hurricane Ian. The president got a firsthand look at the devastation left behind in southwest Florida. Biden touring the damage by air and also on the ground. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis joining Biden on Fisherman's Wharf, where homes and businesses lay in ruin. The pair set aside their political differences to focus on helping people.
Jill and I have had you all in our prayers, and I mean that sincerely. And we're here today because we wanted to tell you in person that we're thinking of you and we're not leaving. We're not leaving until this gets done. I promise you that.
I think one of the things that you're seeing in this response, we are cutting through the bureaucracy. We are cutting through the red tape, and that's from local government, state government, all the way up to the president. So we appreciate the team effort.
Sadly, more than 100 people were killed during the hurricane and many have lost their homes. On Wednesday, President Biden extended the federal disaster declaration for Florida, adding another 30 days of aid to help the long road ahead to rebuild. As Southwest Florida communities pick up the pieces, residents now dealing with another problem, looting. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins reports.
The sheriff of Lee County, Florida, which took a direct hit by Hurricane Ian, announcing multiple arrests for looting during a press conference. The sheriff saying 3 of the people arrested were in the United States illegally.
Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marceno making his position on looting clear.
When I say zero tolerance, I mean zero tolerance.
The sheriff announcing Tuesday the arrests of people suspected of stealing valuables from the rubble.
And I'm proud to say that behind bars where they belong, all 3 of these subjects are here illegally in this country.
If I could, I would take those 3 looters, I'd drag them out by the collars, and I'd send them back to where they came from. These are people that are foreigners. They're illegally in our country. And not only that, they try to loot and ransack in the aftermath of a natural disaster.
Attempting to deter looters, residents of hard-hit areas spray painting messages like "Keep out."
We're seeing the glass being broken out. They're stealing cigarettes, alcohol.
We had issues with the generator that we have power now, right? So people were trying to steal it earlier.
Obviously, there is an aspect of it where people are in need of supplies, and that might be the only way for them to get the supplies. In other cases, people are just trying to capitalize off of a community's misfortune.
The sheriff says the best thing people can do right now is stay off the streets and out of the rubble while law enforcement and first responders continue their efforts. The Lee County Sheriff sending a strong warning for would-be looters that if they walk into a house, they'll have to be carried out. I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting.
Officials in Florida still face questions over evacuation orders for Lee County that bore the brunt of the hurricane and whether that call simply came too late. Lee County's evacuation plan calls for evacuations if there's at least a 10% chance of a 6-foot storm surge. 3 days before the storm hit, the National Weather Service warned of a surge between 4 and 7 feet. However, Lee County wasn't included in the warning until Tuesday, 1 day before Ian made landfall. Officials, are standing by their move, saying the forecast shifted at the last minute and some people just didn't want to leave their homes.
people chose to stay. Is this so unfortunate? We've seen this throughout the years, throughout the country, when people do not listen to the warnings from the media and from the local officials. They made a choice.
I think the thing we've got to think about here is personal responsibility too.
I think that's one thing that everybody needs to understand when making decisions in a disaster. Emergency management directors do not have a crystal ball.
Hurricane Ian is shaping up to be the costliest Florida hurricane since Andrew in 1992. Here's the big number also. Wind and storm damage in the state are estimated between $28 and $47 billion, according to Core Logic. And now we're learning the majority of Florida homes do not have flood insurance. According to the Insurance Information Institute, only 18% have it. State and federal officials say that needs to change.
Just because you're not required to buy flood insurance doesn't mean that you don't have the option to buy it. It is certainly your best defense to help protect your property in the aftermath of any of these storms.
You're going to have people who had total losses who would have bought insurance if they were told they were at risk, but now you're in a situation where you're seeing floods like nobody's ever seen before.
Insurers say many homeowners do not know there's a difference between windstorm coverage and flood coverage.
We've seen how much damage Hurricane Ian has done, and it made us wonder, how much has spending on disasters increased? I am back with our fact check team right now. And Janae, you looked at the numbers. How much more is the federal emergency management and federal government? How much are they spending now?
Right, so from 1980 to 2021, there was an average of 7 natural disasters a year that cost $1 billion or more in cleanup. Now, according to NOAA, we've seen 9 disasters resulting in at least $1 billion in damage so far this year, and that was before Hurricane Ian. Now, just looking at the last 5 years, damages were over $525 billion.
Yeah, so big numbers there. How is the government making sure that we can pay for all of this?
So we looked into it, and that's still a work in progress. So at the federal level, the government is allocating more money. For example, from 2020 through 2021, FEMA provided more money from the Disaster Relief Fund than in any previous 2-year period. And most recently, the Department of Energy put $14 million towards 22 projects aimed at improving weather and climate predictions.
Okay, so Courtney, we just talked about the national level. What about at the state and local level?
So each state handles this issue differently, which makes sense because some are more prone to natural disasters than others. But it's up to them to come up with their own budget. For larger disasters, states can request a presidential declaration, which makes federal funds available. But FEMA just raised the damage threshold for this from just under $140,000 to $1 million, which the National Conference of State Legislatures say will make it more difficult for states to get federal assistance under the Stafford Act. The bottom line here is natural disasters have become more costly, and it's going to be important for these states and the federal government to have plenty of money set aside to rebuild communities.
Yeah, those numbers just keep on rising. All right, Courtney and Janae, thank you. The Fact Check team will continue to follow developments on these and other issues. You can also read this story with the links to where they found their information on our website. That's thenationaldesk.com.
Coming up, a newborn baby caught in the middle of the storm and then separated from her mother. This reunion, days in the making, how this mother and daughter were reunited and the journey through Hurricane Ian to get here. Plus, getting students back in the classroom after going MIA during COVID, what one teacher is doing that may work at your school. Welcome back. The National Desk's team of reporters are bringing you the headlines from coast to coast, from school enrollment dropping in North Carolina to improving student attendance in Virginia. We are taking the pulse of America, but we start with a miracle out of Florida, a newborn evacuated during Hurricane Ian.
Little Amara Fagan was born in Fort Myers September 15th, about 5 weeks premature. Her mom, Kaylee Highland, is delighted her baby girl is okay.
It's the best feeling I could ever ask for.
The little girl was flown by helicopter last Thursday from Golisano Children's Hospital of Southwest Florida in Fort Myers to Cleveland Clinic Tradition Hospital in Port St. Lucie after Hurricane Ian hit Fort Myers, knocking out the hospital's water supply.
I was just afraid of when I was going to be able to see her again.
During the hurricane, the infant was in a neonatal intensive care unit at the hospital in Fort Myers, and Highland wrote out the hurricane at home. The hospital called her last Thursday night, saying the baby was being transferred to another hospital in Port St. Lucie.
I cried, honestly. I couldn't believe she was going so far away.
Kaylee does not have a car, so Cleveland Clinic got her an Uber ride all the way from her home in Southwest Florida to Port St. Lucie, and she got here Monday night to be reunited with her baby for the first time since the hurricane.
I'm excited and just happy to have her.
Amara is one of 8 premature babies that were transferred from the Children's Hospital in Fort Myers to hospitals here on the Treasure Coast.
She looks absolutely healthy and happy, honestly. She looks like she hasn't even been through a hurricane.
This is school now for Diana Nichols' 3 daughters.
We had always talked about homeschool, but I was always afraid to try it.
Her girls used to attend Asheville City schools, the pandemic driving them to make the switch to homeschooling.
With my 2 younger ones, they started having issues with anxiety during the pandemic.
At Asheville City Schools, preliminary average daily membership for this year is 4,033 students, compared to just over 4,400 in 2017. At Buncombe County Schools, their ADM this year is hovering around 22,000 students, a far cry from the 24,000 who attended in 2017.
6% drop from the 1920 to 2021.
In Jackson County Public Schools, preliminary data showing they're down from the nearly 3,700 kids who attended during the 2017-2018 school year.
It is something that we are addressing with strong curriculum, strong academic resources, and strong opportunities.
But for some families, the last few years have been a moment of reckoning.
For the near future anyway, I think we're going to stay with homeschooling.
Students at William Ramsey Elementary are getting one-on-one attention from Mrs. Smaldone.
All right, amazing. Amelson, are you ready?
Something they missed during the pandemic.
Oh, we are so excited to be back.
Alexandria City Public Schools reports chronic absenteeism spiked during the pandemic in times of virtual and distance learning. It nearly doubled for students of color and those with disadvantages, making attendance an area of focus this year.
Students who attend school regularly do better in their academics.
I would say it's critical for every student in the school to be here.
The state of Virginia holds the district accountable. Absenteeism is considered chronic when students miss 10% of school days.
We are constantly checking our attendance, making sure that our social workers work very closely with our department in particular to make sure that our students are coming to school, and if they're not, what are those reasons that they're not?
Still ahead, the future of the COVID shot. The National Desk goes one-on-one with a doctor who served on the administration's COVID Transition Advisory Board to talk about reinfection cases and also boosters. Right now, COVID infections are at a lower level than at previous times in the pandemic, but some regions, including the Northeast and the West, are seeing upticks in cases. The National Desk's Jan Jeffcoat went one-on-one this week with Dr. Julie Morita, who served on the administration's COVID Transition Advisory Board to see what's next in the battle against COVID.
I want to talk first about where we are headed now with the virus. We know it's not going away. At some point, we'll have to learn to live with it, right? So tell me what that looks like and what changes you see ahead when it comes to public policies and COVID.
You know, what we're seeing right now with COVID is that there's lower levels of activity than we've seen in the past. The number of cases, the number of hospitalizations, the number of deaths we're seeing nationally are really at low levels. What I'm also keeping up my eye on is what's happening in specific regions within the United States and then elsewhere. And you can see there are some upticks in disease activity happening in the Northeast, some hospitalizations in the Northeast and in the West as well. And in the UK, you can see some increases in cases. So it's possible that we could actually see an increase in COVID activity in the coming months. The key thing from my perspective is that we have better tools available to us right now than we did a couple of years ago. We have great vaccines that are highly effective and safe. We have great tests that are available, and we also have treatment options that are available. But it's a matter of people taking advantage of those prevention measures that are available now.
Will the COVID shot become a yearly shot? Do you think the American people will continue to get it? Because isn't there already a major decline for boosters?
So right now we have a new booster that's available, and it's specifically made to address the variants that were causing most disease recently. And those vaccines are highly effective and need to be taken advantage of. And I'm concerned when we look at surveys right now and studies, what we're seeing is that there isn't a lot of awareness or interest in getting the booster, but it's really critical for people to get that right now, while we're having a quiet time and a lull in activity. Before the next wave of activity comes, we need to make sure we're taking advantage of that booster.
Well, some question if this is going to become a yearly shot. What do you think?
I think it's hard to know. I think we have an example of influenza, which is a virus that comes every year, and we have to get vaccinated against it. It causes significant disease. It's possible that the COVID could become a disease like that, but we have to have annual vaccinations. Right now, we're in the midst of heading into the flu season, and so people have to remember getting a flu vaccine as well as getting a COVID vaccine.
Yeah, and many people who got the shot also still got COVID. What are we seeing in terms of reinfections and severity? And how much should natural immunity play a factor when it comes to your own personal protection?
So the prior vaccines that were available, we know, did a really good job in recent months in protecting people from getting serious infections, from ending up in the hospital and from dying. They didn't necessarily prevent people from getting sick. What we're hoping with this new booster is that it will also prevent serious disease, death, hospitalization, but also maybe prevent some more mild diseases as well. But that will play out over time, and we'll know for sure later on. I think what's really important is that we know what things can work to help keep ourselves safe. So people who are at high risk for disease, the elderly, people with underlying health conditions, should get vaccinated, should wear masks when they're in crowded situations, should avoid contact with people who are sick. And if they become sick, contact their healthcare providers so they can get started on treatment right away.
And you can watch the full interview and see all the latest updates on COVID-19 on our website, thenationaldesk.com. Still to come, Texas is tracking a troubling trend in human smuggling attempts across the southern border. A former border official breaks down what needs to be done to stop the surge. Well, let's take a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. Tom Brady, considered the greatest quarterback of all time, but his personal life off the field making headlines. Reports circulating that Brady and supermodel wife Giselle both hired divorce lawyers. No official word on how that's going to play out. The divorce saga between Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt is getting nasty. Jolie accusing Pitt of physically abusing two of their children on a private plane back in 2016. In a court filing this week, Pitt, of course, denies those allegations. And also saying goodbye to a country queen. Loretta Lynn died this week at 90 years old. She stole our hearts with her hit song, A Coal Miner's Daughter, her life and inspiration after pulling herself out of poverty in the 60s. Those stories and so much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. And also, we're going to look ahead to the stories making headlines this week. Amazon Prime Early Access Sale kicks off on Tuesday. It's for Prime members only, and officials say there will be discounts for hundreds of thousands of items. On Thursday, new inflation numbers will come out. The last report for August showed prices were up 8.3% compared to 1 year ago. And also on Thursday, the January 6th committee is set to hold its next public hearing. This comes after last week's hearing was rescheduled due to Hurricane Ian. This year, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered a record number of migrants. A look at the debate between politicians and Americans over solutions to the crisis. And Georgia Senate candidate Herschel Walker, is he a hypocrite or the target of a smear campaign? What we know about the abortion bombshell next. And you're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. And of course, anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We will be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Angela Brown. The challenges at the border are mounting: a surge of migrants, a lack of resources, and political battles making the situation a lot more tense. And this number right here really telling the story. U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered more than 2 million migrants at the southern border, a record. The influx of migrants is overwhelming border cities and states like Texas. The National Desk, Christine Frizzell, takes us inside what some communities are dealing with.
The reality on the ground continues to confound local leaders. Del Rio, Texas Sector Border Chief Jason Owens tweeting out these photos from last week. Other border chiefs tweeting updates like this from the weekend. More than 1,400 migrants apprehended, plus major criminal arrests and drug seizures.
The reality is business has never been as good for the cartels as it is right now under this administration's open border policies.
Critics of the Biden administration's border policy continuing to sound alarm bells about the implications.
If you can't successfully control and track who's coming into your country, then that's an enormous vulnerability, an enormous national security vulnerability.
Border officials now telling Fox News they believe there were nearly 600,000 gotaways in the fiscal year which just ended. Compare that to less than 390,000 the year before and 60,000 in 2020. For those who come forward and ask for asylum, Republican governors like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis have come under fire for transporting them to cities like Washington, D.C. and New York City, where resources are running low.
The far right is doing the wrong thing. The far left is doing nothing. I mean, the silence, I don't believe the silence that I'm hearing.
Small cities have struggled as well. This was the scene in El Paso last month. The Democratic mayor there also sending many on buses, but insisting he's giving officials on the other side a heads up.
We talk to them and we say, where do you want to go? What's your destination? And then we will take them and help them get to their destination.
Looming over the question of the best way to respond is, of course, politics. A new Reuters Ipsos poll found 45% of Americans believe transporting migrants across state lines is illegal human trafficking, but also that 49% of Americans believe Democrats who complain about those migrants being sent to their cities or states are hypocrites. I'm Christine Frizzell reporting for the National Desk, America's News Now.
This week, the National Desk Jan Jeffco sat down with former Acting Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan.
The Texas Department of Public Safety reported a rise in human smuggling attempts via plane, with 3 aircraft attempts stopped by Texas DPS in the past month alone. So explain the recent increase in this new trafficking method. Is this something new?
So no, Jan, it's not anything new. We have seen this in the past. But what we're seeing, look, keep in mind, to fly people in, it's costly, it's time consuming, it's hard to coordinate. So what we haven't seen before is the expansive use of this technique, but it's consistent with what we've been seeing for the almost past 20 months, is that every single technique that the cartels and smugglers use have been expanded. Why? Because the Biden administration's open border policies have made it exponentially easier for them to operate and expand those operations. The reality is business has never been as good for the cartels as it is right now under this administration's open border policies.
Speaking of which, last week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott praised his border security initiative, Operation Lone Star, which uses the Texas National Guard and the Texas Department of Public Safety to try to fill some of these gaps border agents just can't fill because they are just inundated. So according to Governor Abbott, he released these figures right here: 308,700 migrant arrests, with 20,000 that were criminal, 17,900 felony charges as a result of that. Troopers also seized millions of fentanyl pills and powder that equal to more than 336 million lethal doses. For the fentanyl crisis alone in this country, this has been important. But what is happening to these drug cartels in the states who are communicating with some of these Mexican drug lords? We see drugs seized, but what about the gangs, the drug smugglers behind it? How hard is this to track down?
Yeah, Jane, that's the question right now. And think about it. Operation Lone Star has been very successful. All those stats, look at that. The drugs, the almost 18,000 criminals, all of those things would have been in the United States had Operation Lone Star not been in existence. And it really illustrates that why the Border Patrol agents are overwhelmed with the crushing flow of illegal aliens. It illustrates another thing we've been talking about for a long time, that illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. It pulls resources off the front line so bad things and bad people can get across. So I applaud Governor Abbott's Operation Lone Star, but the reality is once the drugs get past our southern border and make it in the United States, it's almost impossible to track them down because, as you suggested, the gangs that operate in every town, city, and state in this country act as the drug distribution arm for the cartels. It's a very sophisticated operation. Just within a few hours, 24, 48 hours of the drugs coming across, they're making their way to every town, city, and state in this country.
Yeah, I want to get out this recent report from the Cato Institute showing that The vast majority of drugs being smuggled right now are being smuggled by U.S. citizens in many cases. We've even seen incidents where kids are being recruited. So what are the repercussions for an American citizen caught smuggling drugs? How should the U.S. government be responding to stop this drug trafficking across the border by its own citizens?
Yeah, Jan, so this report is flawed on many aspects. One of them is that you mentioned before, it's not really about the drugs we seize, it's about what we don't seize. So the same thing goes with trying to identify who is responsible for smuggling the majority of the drugs. The reality is we don't know. So again, it's flawed in a variety of reasons. But look, the cartels, it doesn't matter who or what they use. They will use whatever technique, whatever person, whether that's drones or ultralights or tunnels or migrants or U.S. citizens or teenagers. So it's not, look, we should prosecute them fully to the full extent of the law, but that's not the issue. There's lots of smugglers or lots of mules they can use. The issue is what, again, Governor Abbott has done by executive order declaring the cartels a terrorist organization. That's the issue. We should use a whole of government approach to go after the cartels, just like we do with the same strength and resolve as terrorist organizations. This country should wipe the cartels off the face of the planet. That is the issue.
Yeah, and the bottom line is it's still coming from Mexico. It's still coming from across the border. All right, Mark Morgan, always a pleasure to see you. I hope you have a great week. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thanks, Jan.
On Thursday, more buses full of migrants arrived in D.C. A non-governmental group that's been helping arriving migrants says the bus dropped off 38 migrants outside the vice president's home is part of Texas Governor Greg Abbott's campaign to provide what he calls relief to overwhelmed border communities. Texas has sent more than 8,200 migrants on about 200 buses to D.C. since April. And more trouble for Georgia Senate candidate Herschel Walker. He is denying reports published in the Daily Beast that he paid for a former girlfriend's abortion in 2009. Walker, of course, is campaigning against abortion with no exceptions. Walker now says he will sue.
Because they want to make it by everything else except what the true problems that we have in this country is. This inflation, the border wide open, crime. They don't want to talk about that, so they're making up lies.
Well, Walker was making ground in the polls before the story dropped, but he was still trailing incumbent Raphael Warnock. A poll out last week has Warnock ahead of Walker by 5 points. Herschel Walker's abortion payment controversy is not the only October surprise scandal for the GOP before the midterm elections. Pennsylvania Senate candidate Dr. Oz is accused of conducting medical research that led to the death of hundreds of dogs, according to reporting from Jezebel. Oz has not yet publicly responded to this report, but his campaign suggested to Newsweek only idiots believe the reporting. Both Oz and Herschel Walker are in heated races that could tip the balance of power in the Senate. The polls in both races are really starting to tighten up. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio, though, are seeing sizable leads over their Democratic challengers. A Spectrum News Siena College poll shows Rubio ahead of Representative Val Demings. You can kind of see the breakdown right there by 7 percentage points. On the flip side, Governor Ron DeSantis with an 8 percentage point lead, the numbers right there, over Representative Charlie Crist. DeSantis is seen as a top contender for the 2024 presidential GOP nomination.
A UC Davis survey shows 67% of Americans think political violence is a serious threat to our democracy. I'm back with our fact check team. And Connor, with this increase in attacks, what measures are being taken to try and curb that violence?
There's a few things that Congress are doing, and we found that they just passed a $1.9 billion emergency spending package last year to upgrade Capitol security as a response to January 6th. But more recently, the House Sergeant at Arms created a security program that launched in August, and it pays for up to $10,000 worth of security system equipment and installation costs at members' homes. So with this money, they can buy things like motion sensors, cameras, and locks. But the program also covers monitoring and maintenance fees up to $150 a month. But this is only for House members, and we reached out to the Senate side and didn't hear back on whether or not they plan or have a similar program.
All right, since January 6th, a lot of attention has been put on Capitol Police. Are they increasing their security as well?
Well, we spoke to them today, and they said that for safety reasons, they don't discuss how security decisions are made, what measures are taken, or what resources go into protecting members of Congress. But they did tell us that they're looking to hire roughly 280 officers this year. That's about double the amount they normally hire, and so far they're on track to do that.
So, Courtney, what about members themselves? Are they taking matters into their own hands at all?
It does seem that way. Security concerns have actually grown so much that many members of Congress are dipping into their own official or campaign accounts to protect themselves. According to a New York Times analysis of congressional data, since just last year, they've spent more than $6 million on security, with Democrats spending about $9,000 more on average than Republicans.
All right, who's spending the most?
So we have that data pulled up for you. You'll see that at the top is Senator Raphael Warnock, who is up for re-election. He spent over $600,000 last year. Second is Senator Ted Cruz, and Senator Jon Ossoff is third.
All right, some big price tags there. All right, Courtney, Connor, thank you so much. The Fact Check team will continue to follow developments on these and other issues. You can also read this story with the links to where they found their information. It's on our website, thenationaldesk.com.
And straight ahead, a credit card scam costing businesses big. The alleged act caught on camera what owners say about the scheme that's growing in popularity. Then, reckless driving frustrations. Residents in a neighborhood fed up over the dangers on their streets. The action city officials say they are taking to curb incidents. The National Desk's team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We are taking the pulse of America. We start in California, where a quick switch crime is costing businesses hundreds of dollars.
Take a close look at this woman dressed in black from head to toe as she walks into the 7-Eleven location in Southeast Fresno on Belmont and Chestnut Friday afternoon. The woman tells the cashier she's loading one of these, a prepaid vanilla Visa card with $500. In a matter of seconds, the clerk loads up the card and puts it on the counter and begins to count out the woman's cash. Now, she's given him a lot of bills on purpose to distract him while she pulls off the switcheroo. Did you miss it? Take another look at what she just did. She swaps out the loaded card for one in her purse, puts the other one out, puts her hand on her hip, and just waits while the cashier is still counting the money. Turns out she was short and tells him that she needs to go get the rest of the money from her car. She takes back her cash and the loaded card in her purse, leaving the empty card behind.
It's hard times. Businesses are losing money. I mean, the sales are down, theft is up, crime is up. We can't find employees, and then you have these scammers come and do all this stuff.
In Washington, teens are falling victim to online scams at an alarming rate. Money lost by victims under 20 years old grew by 1,100% over the past 5 years. According to Social Catfish, the top scams targeting teens online are sextortion plots against boys, student loan scams, talent scout scams, and in-game purchase scams.
They're overconfident when they go online and they're on social media, when they're talking to people, and they actually invite
conversations from people they don't know, because it's, you know, it's the cool thing to be a TikToker. It's a cool thing to be an influencer, right?
Well, Social Catfish says seniors still remain the most victimized by online scams, losing over $1 billion last year. In Utah, Ogden residents are worried someone could get killed because of the high number of reckless drivers on North Monroe Boulevard. Residents say they have sent the mayor over 40 videos of reckless driving incidents, and things are actually getting worse in recent months. According to them, residents claim they are met with threats from drivers, loud noises, and overall dangerous conditions near their homes.
No respect for nobody. I've almost been hit just trying to get my mail. Some of the kids won't even come out and play because they're scared to get run over.
Wow. Ogden police say they have increased patrols in the area, put up cameras, and have investigated drivers. Still to come, our team of correspondents break down this week in Washington, D.C., from President Biden's handling of the economy to rising gas prices.
Our Washington Bureau covers Capitol Hill and D.C. every day to report on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. For some perspective on what's happening in the nation's capital, I'm joined by two of our Bureau correspondents, Scott Thuman and Atra Elnashar. Atra, President Biden hit the road this week to tout his economic policies. He was in Maryland on Friday. You went there ahead of his visit. What did you hear?
Yeah, President Biden's message here when he's making these kinds of stops is about building the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. But he's got some headwinds. Not just what the polls tell us about voters consistently disapproving of his handling of the economy and trusting Republicans with economic issues, while they trust Democrats with more social issues, healthcare, things like that. But there's also the fact in recent days, almost more than a week now, perhaps, that gas prices are starting to tick back up, and they're ticking back up in some critical swing states where there's elections that are going to decide the balance of power in Congress. So I went over to Maryland, stopped at a gas station, talked to people filling up, and asked, is it painful to watch, just how high these gas prices have gone back up now? And, instead of price shock, I kind of got the sense that people are just used to it by now. Doesn't mean they're happy about it, but they've learned to adjust. They've had this mindset now of just coming to expect inflation, which on a macro scale is actually pretty dangerous for fighting inflation. That's where you get the territory of stagflation that the Federal Reserve absolutely wants to avoid. I also heard from local businesses who are still dealing with supply chain issues, so product delays, product shortages. So folks are seeming very much used to it, at least anecdotally that I talked to, but they certainly want to see a change. It's to be seen, though, if they're going to use their ballot to try and get that change.
And Scott, Atra talking about gas prices shooting up last week, sure to make things worse. OPEC announcing they're sharply reducing their oil output. What's the political fallout of all of this?
Well, this really
in a bind, as well as the Democratic Party, because they were starting to see some relief at the pump. They believe that translated into better polling for the party in the midterm coming up in just a matter of a few weeks. And then, of course, you see this now crisis kind of emerging about what that may do to prices when you see a reduction of perhaps 2 million barrels a day. So it puts the president on a really fine line. Does he push back against Saudi Arabia, retaliate by saying, okay, we're not going to trade as much with you, or does he continue to woo them? Remember, this was just months after he met with the Crown Prince. There was that controversial fist bump, and they seem to put some of this consternation behind them. It's not the kind of economic news that the president or Democrats want, and both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have encouraged the president and this White House to be much, much tougher on this issue.
Chief Political Correspondent Scott Thuman, National Correspondent Atra Elnishar, thanks for joining us.
School safety drills. When it comes to protecting staff and students from mass shootings, some states are missing the mark. How lawmakers plan to change that next. If you're a parent, school safety is top of mind with kids now back in the classroom. But is violence protection a priority in your school? Tonight, our Spotlight on America investigative reporter Mitch Blocker finds some American schools are flying blind when it comes to protecting our kids.
In a school emergency,
man just got shot.
Would your child know what to do with their teacher?
But you don't know pain until you bury 5 of your kids.
Missy Dodds thought she and her school were ready for a crisis until a gunman burst into her Minnesota classroom, killing 10 in 2005. Did your school practice lockdown drills?
I do not remember in my 3 years there ever having a lockdown drill.
We've discovered her experience is not unique. Spotlight on America looked through years' worth of state and local school safety records across the country. In Washington, D.C. and a half dozen states, we found schools skipping safety drills and often no one monitoring to make sure they're done.
It's important that we do these in school. We do these properly. The federal government steps in, provides the proper training, the proper guidance, and helps protect our kids.
Even in states home to some of America's deadliest school shootings, we discovered there are no consistent safety drill standards. In Texas, where 21 died in Uvalde, it's up to individual school boards to decide how many safety drills kids do. It's the same in Florida, where 17 died at Stoneman Douglas High School. And that's not going to keep kids safe, according to Jacqueline Schulkraut of the State University of New York, one of the few to study this issue nationally.
We have a significant issue at the federal level, and that we have no federal guidance on what these should look like. And so because of that, you have a lot of variability within and between states and districts.
Who do you think at the federal level should be responsible for making this uniform?
Absolutely, the U.S. Department of Education.
We learned that the Department of Education posts safety information for schools on its website. But if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see how much faith the federal government has in its own advice. The disclaimer says this website should not be presumed to reflect the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. The department does not guarantee the accuracy, timeliness, applicability, or completeness of the information on this site.
Staff at the U.S. Department of Education told us by law it is not allowed to tell schools what to do. So we took our questions to the people who make the laws.
Why is there no universal standard for practicing safety in schools across this country?
Well, that's part of why I've introduced the School Shooting Safety and Preparedness Act.
Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz wants to force the Department of Education to start collecting and reporting basic school safety information, including the number of school shootings, number of people killed or injured, how shooters were stopped, and the types of weapons and ammo they used.
I don't know how you would make national federal policy that is minimum safety standards required for every school district if you haven't defined what are our most significant problems and where are the similarities.
The bill takes a first step toward creating those minimum safety standards by getting a detailed handle on the actual risks schools face. But until that happens, school safety remains a patchwork of policies, leaving people like Missy Dodds worried history will keep repeating itself.
You can fix it. You can fix it in simple ways. You can give guidance on how to do drills. I get mad when I think about it as far as why are we not doing everything we can?
For Spotlight on America, I'm Mitch Blocker in Washington.
The Congresswoman's bill has passed the Education Committee on Capitol Hill. The next hurdle is a vote on the House floor. Well, that's all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk. America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us anytime you want to online and catch up with the latest headlines on the nationaldesk.com. Thank you so very much for watching us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.